Welcome to How It All Started podcast in North Iowa. My name is Erick Nganyange, and my guest today is the headmaster of Clear Lake Classical School, Mr. Cory Gerdts. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thanks for coming in. This is exciting.
Now, there's been a huge resurgence of classical education in the last, 15, 20 years. You're one of those people kind of be on the front line to revive this long tradition, about over 2,000 years old education for our young people. And I want to go back from the beginning. So the school started in 2014?
2014, we incorporated, I guess. It was about a year ahead of that some things came together before anyone really knew what was going on. And I can do the 3-minute version or the 50-minute version.
We want the 50-minute version because we want everything in there.
Well, before we get in, it's kind of you to say that I'm somehow we're somehow on the early lines of this, but the reality is we all stand on the shoulders of giants, and we're all following the footsteps of those who have paved the way. So in that sense, we're just trying to be faithful with the next step.
Yeah.
And, you throw a compliment this way, it's coming back at you. So when I found out that there's this crazy guy in Mason City who's doing this podcast about classical philosophical works with a couple of buddies, I thought, what? That's happening here?
Yeah.
And, so that was a neat moment when I don't know if you called or just stopped in. I don't even remember, but
yeah, I think I shot you an email.
Yeah, and I was like, what?
Yeah, because
this is Mason City, Iowa?
I know. And for me, it was the same thing. I'm like, classical school in North Iowa? I don't think this is the real one. But, let me go see.
Yeah.
And then I came in, I was like, oh, that's happening.
Yeah. Well, the Lord works in mysterious ways. And I think one of the reasons that this type of movement can happen anywhere is one of the reasons for the movement, which is that classical or historical and good education, good learning can be found anywhere. Even before the internet, we had a good canon of books to jump off from, coming back to the idea of standing on the shoulders of giants. But so people point to me as the founder, but of course there were a number of founders. It wasn't just me. The genesis was I had a vocational sort of crossroads. Long story short, I won't get into it, but I just had some time to read.
Yeah.
While I was still getting paid by my primary job, which remains so, I stumbled on classical education. As it happened, I had a thought in my mind at the time. My wife and I had decided to stay here in North Iowa in Clear Lake and not move to where we both went to college. Had a job opportunity there. Decided to stay here. In doing that, we had in our minds, okay, Lord, what is it that you want us to do? So we weren't 17, 18, 19, but we were young enough that we could think, okay, we have 40 years or potentially, Lord willing, of planning to live in one place. We don't want to wake up when we're 75 and say, man, we knew we were going to be here. Why didn't we build something?
Yeah, why we didn't do anything?
Yeah, because there's some things you can do in a year no matter where you are. Some things take decades.
Yeah. At this time, did you guys have kids yet?
No, we didn't have kids.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that question was ringing in my head, like, what should we do? Is there something that the Lord is calling us to do in this community that takes time?
Yeah. And
that's when I stumbled on classical Christian education and just really loved what I was reading right away.
Do you remember what are you reading?
Oh, I was reading things. I stumbled on things like Wisdom and Eloquence by Little John and Evans, Case for Classical Christian Education, and therefore Dorothy Sayers' essay, Lost Tools of Writing. And then all of the books that kind of have flowed from that, and really appreciated the general direction and general idea of education has not gone all wrong, but we've gotten rid of some things without really good justification for getting rid of them. And so when you simply pause and say, well, why did we stop teaching Latin? Or why did we stop teaching in this way? Why did we stop focusing on the great books or the great conversation? And realizing there was no really good answer to that, except for potentially a pragmatic one, or Latin's a dead language, what's the point? And so it just really struck a chord with me. And then we had moved here, my wife and I, from the Chicago area, and involved in a couple of churches there. And I just asked some of our friends from back there, hey, have you ever heard of this classical education thing? Because I stumbled upon it and this seems pretty interesting. And the response I get was, oh yeah, like we're doing that. In fact, one of our friends was the head of a school. We didn't even know it. We didn't have kids at the time. We weren't thinking about education.
Was the heading of school?
Of a head of a school
in Clear Lake?
No, in Chicago.
Oh,
in a Chicago school.
Okay.
And so it was just affirmation that, okay, these people that we're connected with, that we trust, they're already doing this. We hadn't heard of it because we didn't have kids. We weren't thinking about that. But it was still not clear to us that this was, some sort of calling. Over the next 9 months, I had a conversation with a number of people, family members. Some had heard of classical Christian education. Most had no clue. Talking with various people in the community, empty nesters, etc. And it became clear that there was enough interest in what I was reading about that it would be worth considering doing something. Well, the following spring, so now we're in the spring of 2014. Just had a simple gathering, kind of invite only, but invite anyone who might be interested, and had a pretty good response. And there was a gal who came up at that meeting and said, I can't believe that you're talking about this. We've been praying for a school like this ever since we moved to North Iowa. I've even taught in a classical school before. Let's get this started this fall. I'll teach. You don't even have to pay me. Let's just get it going.
Oh, wow.
So this was on their mind, and this was the Lund family, Brian and Samantha Lund, who live over in Garner. And that really expedited the start. I was thinking maybe in a year and a half, let's cobble something together.
Yeah.
And so that fall, we started a pre-K, and Mrs. Lund taught it, and Mr. Lund, Brian, became one of our founding board members with my brother-in-law and my father-in-law. We spent about a year, basically that full first year, meeting as a board weekly and pounding through a vision for the school and policy stuff, some of that boring stuff that's pretty important still. Mm-hmm. And in the meantime, we were running a pre-K 2 days a week, real simple. Started with 3 kids. Then shortly we had 4, and by the end of the school year we had 5. So, 60% growth in that first year. No, but of course it wasn't at all about that. But we were just kind of gearing up, actually doing something. And this is a lot of people who are looking to start schools have talked to me since then. Say, hey, what did you do? What do you recommend? And my first recommendation is just start something. Just get something going. However humble, because once you have something going, you have something to show others. Even if it's simple, and it shows someone who might be like-minded or might know what they're after, it shows that you're serious enough to actually get it going. Yeah. And that was a really important impetus for us as a school, I think. So then that following fall, so it would have been the fall of 2015, we had a pre-K through second grade. So we kind of launched K through 2 as our full-time everyday school, and then we had a pre-K that met 3 days a week that year as well. And it's kind of been slow, sometimes fast, but mostly nice, slow, manageable, steady growth up until today. I think we have almost 150 students from pre-K through 12, and had our first graduating class last year. So that's kind of the start of how it all started.
Man, you guys are not just classical school; you're a classical Christian school.
Yeah.
Why did you feel the need to do both, not the either or?
Yeah, that's a good question. Some would, of course, argue that there's no such thing as a classical school that's not Christian, in the sense that classical Christian schools are coming out of the Western tradition. In the expanse of the West, of course, Christianity expanded with the West. But more importantly, the classical tradition is heavy emphasis on virtue development, character development, and views theology, we'll say, as the queen of the sciences. And so to many, including me, it's a bit of a misnomer or an incompatibility to say, well, we're going to be a classical school, but not a Christian school. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it can be done on some level, but you miss, in my view, you miss the heart of what classical education through the history of the West has been. Now, if we go all the way back, which we do, to the Greeks and the Romans, of course, they were doing education that wasn't Christian.
Yep.
So if you want to give the exact education as a as a young, wise and probably wealthy
Yeah.
Greek child got, or a Roman child got, it would of course not be Christian in nature, but we're trying to deliver a classical education in the Christian tradition as it has extended in the expansion of the West.
Maybe let's go back a little bit. How do you define a classical education for somebody who does not know? What are you talking about?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I mean, it should be simple, and in some ways it is simple, but you can talk about it for hours and hours and hours, right? So a classical Christian education, as we view it and try to implement it, is, first of all, it's a restorative movement. We're not trying to start a revolution.
Anything new, yeah.
Yeah. In fact, that's a key component. This isn't new. This is old in all the best ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. So C.S. Lewis has warned us not to have cultural myopia in paying too much attention to what's happened recently, ignoring what's happened in the past. And so we're looking to restore a style and pedagogy of education that was remarkably successful for many centuries.
Yeah.
And so in the classical tradition, education in the classical tradition would focus on centrally the seven classical liberal arts. In the context of a K through 12 school, a lot of that is focused on the three arts of the trivium, the three liberal arts of the trivium, which historically are grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. Someone might say grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And so these are the three liberal arts of language. So grammar is a fairly common term to most people in the sense that you have English grammar. And in that sense, it's a helpful term because people can understand what English grammar is. And of course, students need to learn how to formulate words, how to read, how to sound out words, what words mean, how to formulate a sentence. And so that's a huge emphasis for us. Our students, if you were to come, and I know you have, but if someone were to come and walk through our halls, one of the things that stands out to them is first, second, third graders diagramming sentences. We call it classification. But they can read a sentence and tell you what part of speech each of the words are in the sentence. And so we're wanting them to get a mastery of language right away. So that's grammar. Yeah. And then the second liberal art of the trivium, which
and before you go, the grammar part is heavily focused on K through 6th grade.
Yeah. So what you're hitting on is the idea that the three liberal arts of language nicely settle into different ages of development. Yeah. But it's historically true to a large degree as well, where you would learn language from a grammar standpoint. And so that we have a heavy emphasis on the grammar of language, let's say K through 4, K through 5, even K through 6. And then dialectic or logic would be learning to reason. So the joke that we often tell is, well, junior hires like to argue. Well, let's teach them to argue well, as long as they're going to be argumentative, right?
Why not?
Let's lean into it.
Yeah.
And so we actually teach logic as it's our 8th grade science class, but we're also looking to have our students think and reason logically throughout that phase, we'll say, or that time of learning dialectic as a subject, the reasoning of language.
Yeah. Which is part of critical thinking.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
It's foundational.
Yeah.
Now, I think I'm a pretty good critical thinker, far from the best, but I didn't take logic until I was a junior in college, and it was an elective course. And I think much to my detriment. I think if I had learned formal logical reasoning, syllogisms, fallacies in a formal setting when I was in 8th grade, I think that would have served me so well. I'm a chemist by training, so I'm a scientist by training. And I think that just would have served me so well throughout my high school and then college education.
And throughout your life.
Throughout my life. And I'm one that's inclined to logical reasoning, so I really enjoyed my logic class in college. I could have gotten my chemistry degree and never taken a logic class. I think this is one of those examples of seeking after the pragmatism of the age. Our educational environment has said, well, yeah, logic would be nice, but it's not going to help you get that job, or at least it's not perceived to help you get a job and get a paycheck, and therefore we're going to take it out of our curriculum. And we're kind of saying, there's a ton of value there for giving, as we talk in classical circles, giving students the tools of learning, so that when they graduate from our school, our desire, we don't care what they do in one sense. Vocationally, they can stay at home, they can be plumbers, they can be scientists, they can be astronomers, whatever. But we want them to be able to go out and have the tools in their tool belt to go learn whatever it is God has called them to do vocationally. This is our desire from an academic standpoint, is that they have the tools of learning, and they can do whatever it is. We're not primarily teaching specific skills, except for the skills of the liberal arts, which is to understand language, reason well, and then the third art of the trivium would be rhetoric, or the art of persuasion, as Aristotle would say.
So you say there's 7 classes of liberal arts, and you given 3 of those. So when is the other 4 comes into play?
Yeah, so from a classical perspective, the other 4 liberal arts are the 4 liberal arts of the mathematics, and those would be arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. I don't know if we have time to totally unpack that. I'll give a recommended resource for someone who wants to go deeper here, and that's the Liberal Arts Tradition by Kevin Clark and Robbie Jane. Probably my favorite book on classical Christian education, because I think it does the best job of any book out there at placing the classical Christian pedagogy and desires for education in a modern context. Okay. So we could do a survey of classical Christian education over the past 2 millennia, and pull and realize that it's been, in terms of how it's been implemented in different stages of in different centuries, it's been implemented in different ways, which is not surprising. It's going through a series of cultures, but there are certain things that have remained and are consistent. But what Clark and Jane have done is not only framed it within our modern context, but helped those of us who have read and who are in the midst of this, again, frame what the classical approach has been with how it can look in a modern context. So, for example, if you think about astronomy as a mathematics, or as an element of mathematics, what has been done historically is astronomy has been used as a way to chart predictions. So that was the subject, is how can I come up with a system that will predict when Venus will show up in the sky the next time? And the ones who are best at astronomy are those who can make the best predictions of what's to come. So you're making a series of observations and developing a system, a mathematical system by which predictions for the next thing can come. In a sense, we're not doing that in high school, right, these days. So there's a sense where that has gone by the wayside. But it's still important for us as a school to help students develop systems of predicting things or understanding things. And so to that degree, it's very much alive and well. And whereas astronomy may not fit in the same way in 2023 as it did in 1100 or 600, chemistry wasn't really around in 400 like it is today. Mm-hmm. So we're not saying, well, it wasn't around in 400 AD, therefore we're not teaching chemistry. Yeah. They actually did, in a sense, they did teach chemistry. They just called it natural philosophy. Okay? It was the pursuit.
That's a whole another ball game.
Yeah, it's like the pursuit of what's the nature that's around you. And then over time, again, standing on the shoulders of giants, chemistry or physics had developed as their own disciplines, but they still fit under the banner of natural philosophy. So let me come back to that. But the 7 liberal arts, then being grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric, and then the mathematics of arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music, are still incorporated into our school in a number of ways. So arithmetic is obvious enough. We're doing that from the very beginning, of course. Geometry as well fits well with that logic phase. Geometry is like an 8th or 9th grade course. We're in that logical reasoning. And then music has a couple of different meanings within the classical tradition. First and foremost is the music that we understand, and think about, playing the violin or playing the trumpet, the relation between harmonies and music. That's, of course, music is almost entirely a mathematical thing.
I never thought about that.
Oh, it's absolutely mathematical.
Yeah.
There's intervals that sound good together. There's the vibrations of the string. There's the length of the string. If you go half the length, you change the pitch in a particular way every time. So it's very mathematical. But there's also an element of music as a mathematics and music as an opening the mind to wonder at the world. So music is actually pretty foundational for us as a school. We talk about this a lot with our staff because it's almost like new old thinking for us. For example, one of the things that we challenge our grammar level teachers, so K through 3, K through 4, even K through 6, one of their primary jobs is to, as we say, awaken the wonder in students. We want them to, on a regular basis, have an experience where they sit back and say, oh, wow, is that how that works? Or, oh, wow, how does that work? Our goal with the young students is to give them a chance to muse. Music comes from the root word muse, which is to think deeply or think carefully, maybe open one's mind to the world around you. So when you go to a museum, your goal, your desire is to look upon the works of art or look upon the artifacts from history and sit and think and wonder and say, wow. And just take a beat, take some time and say, I wonder how that works or how could that be? The reason that this is such an emphasis in the young student for us is we want that to lead to, I can't wait until I could study that.
Yeah.
Or I can't wait to learn this arithmetic so that I'm prepared to learn about that more. And so music becomes fundamental, almost it's an antecedent to learning the liberal arts because you're training the student to want to know more.
Okay. Let's go back to the grammar a little bit. Can you be considered as a classical school if you don't teach Latin?
I think so.
Okay.
I think you could not teach Latin and still be a classical Christian school. I would simply pose the question, well, why not? And that might sound strange to people because I didn't learn Latin when I was growing up and I seem to be fine. I'm healthy, my mind seems to still work. But the reasons I think, and I don't really know, but I think the reason that we don't teach Latin in most schools these days is not because it wasn't useful to the student or wasn't good for the student or didn't actually help them in a variety of ways. I think the reason that most schools don't teach Latin is that parents probably got frustrated with their kids learning Latin and say, why are we doing this? No one speaks this anyway. What's the point? Schools, administrators, whatever, either weren't prepared to defend the reasons for it or didn't know the reasons themselves, or it was just not a hill they wanted to die on for whatever.
And I found out by, of course, reading this stuff that 50% of English words come from Latin.
Yeah, so that's maybe the 1A reason why we teach Latin is English is a Latin-rooted language. And if you learn, just thinking about the vocabulary part, if you learn the root words in Latin, you're going to have a much better understanding of the English language that we speak. So yeah, like you said, over 50% of English words have a Latin root, come from Latin. But there are other reasons. So, the derivation to English, the ability to speak other Latin-based languages and learn them. So our upper school students, after they've taken Latin for 4 or 5 years or more, you think Spanish is hard for them? Not especially. And so they take Spanish in high school, it comes super easy. And if they want to do French or Portuguese, Italian, those would all come really easy to them. So that's kind of a nice side benefit. I'm a chemist by training, so I had to memorize all these Latin terms when I was in college.
There you go.
And if I had just taken 2 years of Latin in 3rd and 4th grade, that would have been a lot easier. Oh, yeah. So anyone going into scientific or medical field is going to encounter all sorts of Latin terms, just simply vocabulary, but also the great scientists of the Western tradition, which is to say most of the great scientists in history that we're familiar with, did all their work in Latin. And so if you want to go read their original works or even understand references to things, having at least a rudimentary understanding of Latin is really helpful. But then that also applies to other subject areas. So the history of literature, all sorts of other subject areas is in Latin, and it's good for students to be able to go interact with those original works in their original language, or at least understand what's happening there.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole, so those are kind of the nice pragmatic, practical benefits that kind of make sense to anyone. But there's this other kind of secret benefit of Latin, particularly for a student from, let's say, 9 to 15. And that is the way that Latin is constructed is really logical. It's hard to even describe, but I'll just, hopefully your listeners can take my word for it. It trains the mind to think logically, just the way the language is constructed. And so at this time when we're training their minds to work in a particular way, learning Latin as a language leans into that. And so it helps them think in this ordered way. There are also some other interesting potential benefits for students who maybe struggle to read, for example. Or we've seen anecdotally that maybe students who have dyslexia or whatnot, they get into the Latin class and suddenly they don't have those problems anymore. So they spell better in their Latin class than they do in their English class. And that could be from, how they picked up sight words and guessing at words that they think is right in English, whereas you get into Latin class, you don't know any of it. And so there's nothing to guess. Yeah. So you have to go with what is actually written there. Anyway, so there are some other benefits there, but just on the whole, there are just so many positives to it that, it'd be easy. And even I could admit, our students are never going to go out and be speaking Latin with their friends or neighbors, but it almost doesn't matter because that's not the point in the first place.
Yeah. And you guys start teaching Latin from kindergarten, or is it?
No, we start in third grade. So we want them to get a good base in reading and understanding of English, and then we bring in Latin, and we have Latin from 3rd through 8th grade, and then we have it as an optional elective to continue in high school for another 2 years.
Okay.
So you can take up to, I guess it would be 6, 7, 8 years of Latin with us. Yeah. And the idea is that the hope is that if you go through our entire Latin program through 3rd through 8th grade, and particularly if you extend into 2 more years in high school, you'll be able to just read and translate basically any Latin work. We think about the Latin Vulgate as kind of our, hey, if our students can translate the Vulgate, and then they should be good. They've learned everything that they should be expected to learn.
Oh, wow. By the time you get to high school, if you started here maybe in kindergarten, by the time you get to high school, you should be pretty fluent in Latin.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Do you guys have high school kids reading some of the classical work in Latin?
I don't know that we have, so not in the context of for other classes, but absolutely, they're reading and translating original Latin works as freshmen and sophomores. Yeah, sure.
Oh, wow. So you would never advise anybody to bring their kids here, like if they're in middle school? That would be tough.
Well, so I certainly wouldn't dissuade someone from having a conversation with us.
Yeah.
Certainly, it's a challenge to come into a classical school if you haven't had the foundation. Every grade that you progress, it gets harder to transition in. Yeah. So easier to come in at kindergarten than first grade, and first grade than second grade, and second grade than fifth grade, et cetera. And there becomes a point, like if you're coming in for the first time as a junior in high school, you've missed so much foundation that it's really going to be tough even to interact in some ways, because a lot of what we do is discussion oriented, and we're referring to works that have been read, and our students read a lot of books.
Yeah.
But that being said, we have set up our Latin program understanding that we will have students transfer in who have had no Latin. I mean, we'd be silly if we didn't plan for that. So we really have 4 onboarding opportunities for Latin. So of course there's third grade. It's easy to start there. To some degree, starting in fifth grade is also a kind of another starting point, just the way the curriculum works. 7th grade is another starting point for us. So I guess it's really three onboarding location, because in 7th grade, we start with a new curriculum that goes faster, but it's meant to be an immersive curriculum where everything you do, there's no English in the book. It's all Latin. So it's an immersive style, but we start at the beginning of that curriculum. So it's just that the other students in your class will have a leg up because they're going to know a lot of vocabulary and stuff. But the curriculum is meant to be started with what we started in 7th grade. So kind of 3rd, 5th, and 7th are options for students to onboard. And then, if you're coming, if we have a student who would come in for the first time as a freshman in high school, they could just choose not to take Latin as that elective. They could choose to take it if they were interested. Yeah. But at that point, it wouldn't be a requirement to take Latin. So that transition from a Latin standpoint, I mean, they would have missed out on a lot. Yeah. But it doesn't preclude them from moving forward.
Yeah. What's the difference between public school and classical school? What is my kid missing by going to Mason City School versus coming to Clear Lake Classical?
Sure. I don't think of it so much as what are they missing. I'm one who doesn't try to make waves. We are who we are. We are the school that we are, and either a family or a set of parents wants what we're offering or they don't. And I'm comfortable either way, I think we as a school are as well. But I'm happy to talk about things that are distinctive. So what we're offering to parents is, first of all, an opportunity for them to expose their children to I could say rigorous, that's kind of a buzzword in classical circles. I don't think our education is especially rigorous in the sense that it's unreasonable large amount of work. I think, in fact, historically, what we're asking students to do is almost embarrassing compared to what students did 300 years ago. If you think about the founders of this American experiment, I mean, all those guys and gals, I suppose, who had an opportunity to be educated, they had to demonstrate proficiency in Greek and Latin to get into college.
Oh yeah, because I think most of them were classical.
Oh, of course,
student.
I mean, that's what they had.
Yeah,
there wasn't any other possibility. So, in that sense, we've lost a lot. And so, what I would say is we do ask our students to be students. In fact, just the other day, I was giving a talk with some of our students and reminding them that their vocation in this time of life is to be a student. Yeah, they don't get paid for it, like we get paid for doing a job. But this is their primary role. Yeah. And in fact, it's a pretty good deal for them because, if you work your regular job, you're working 2,080 hours a year in a 52-week year. And if you're a student, you're only in school for 1,100 hours or something like that. So there you go. So they got it pretty good. They should enjoy it while they got it. But
plus, they're reading great books.
Yeah, and here that's we say, look, we're putting a feast in front of you. We read this book actually called, once they get into middle or upper school, called Classical Me, Classical Thee, and it's meant to show or just peel back a little bit behind the curtain to see if our students can understand the feast of learning that we're putting in front of them, and hopefully that encourages them to say, okay, this is going to be really good for me, even if at any given moment it's difficult, or I'd rather sit around and play video games or whatever students do these days. But coming back to the distinctives, we're giving parents an opportunity to say, this is what I want for my child, and it's here, and I'm going to go after it. So that's one distinctive, is that we actually ask students to be students and to have all sorts of safeguards in place, hopefully to not ask too much of them. But we do ask them to really work. So that's one thing. And then other things are what we've already talked about. So we're a fully orbed Christian education. So if you don't want a Christian education for your child, if you don't want them to see things through objective truth and objective beauty and objective goodness, if you don't believe that objectivity exists in that sense, we're probably not the right school for you. So yes, we're distinctive, but in a way that you don't want. But if you're looking for your child to process the world that they encounter through a biblical worldview in which Christ is on the throne, reigning, and this is our ultimate goal, our ultimate role in life is to bring and give him glory in everything that we do. If that's what you want, whether the student is in a chemistry class or a mathematics class or a history class or a Bible class, then maybe the school is for you. In fact, one of our upper school classes, we call it omnibus class. It's meant to present students with original sources. So that's one thing. We try to have our students reading original works.
Yes.
We don't want them reading textbooks that tell them what's in the original works.
Yep. And I think that's the biggest problem, actually. Kids just reading the textbook that tell them what happened, what the original work says.
Yeah.
Instead of just go to the source.
Exactly. Because that's going to bring a perspective, of course. And there are times that you have to do that, like certain, in order to really capture history from start to finish, someone has to summarize that for you, and you have to go through that. So we have a history book that we use as kind of our way that we march through history. But we're trying to have them read original sources, and our juniors and our freshmen and sophomore are reading Crito and his dialogues with Socrates. So we want them interacting with original sources so that they can discern their own conclusions from that. But where I was going with that omnibus class is it's a single class that's a double period from which we pull a Bible grade, a history grade, and a literature grade. And so just by virtue of having that class, we are trying to communicate to students that you ought not to be reading literature and not thinking about what God has to say about it. Or you ought not to be reading history separate from God's sovereignty, the idea of God's sovereignty, or God's work in the world, or his sovereign will. And so, again, if a parent wants that for their child, then maybe this is the right place for them. Yeah. And then the other major distinctive, we've hit on a lot of that, is, if you want the type of education that has been around for literally centuries and has been very successful, teaching and learning and understanding Latin, and teaching and learning and understanding logic, the classic liberal arts, if you want a joyfully disciplined environment, which we absolutely have, and we love it. We have expectations of students, and wouldn't you know it, when you set the expectation out and then you require it, in general, students want to meet that expectation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So 50% of English words comes from Latin, and then 30% come from Greek. Mm-hmm. Do you teach Greek here?
We don't. It's on our list.
Oh, okay.
It's on our short list of things we'd like to do. We're still a new school, so we have 20 or so high school students. And so if we're teaching them Latin and Spanish, at some point you can't do it all. But we, in a steady state, so if we were a steady state school, let's say projecting 10 years ahead or 15 years ahead, I think an option, if not a requirement to take some biblical koine would be high on our list.
Okay. I want to go back to the reviving of the classical education. What do you think caused that type of education to disappear for a certain period of time? Because, now we say it's a 2,000 years old education style, but there was time, I think, mid-1800s, and it was kind of start getting away from it, and then we went to the modern education, and now we have this resurgence comes back. What was the cause of that?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say for sure. I think if you read some history, and I don't claim to be a historian, but if you well read enough and you've thought about classical education, what education was and how it shifted and morphed, I think one of the big sort of cultural forces. There was this kind of a secular driving cultural force away from a Christian worldview that's been happening for 150 years. But there's also the idea that the Industrial Revolution came along, and governments, will say, including the American government, said, "Hey, we need skilled workers in these jobs to accomplish these specific tasks."
Yep.
And so the pragmatic solution to that is to educate a populace in very specific skills so that you can fill those jobs. We're seeing it now with the STEM, push. And look, I'm a scientist. I have a PhD in chemistry, so I'm all about science, technology, engineering, and whatever the M stands, mathematics. Yeah. I'm all for it. I loved it. I still do. I think it's highly valuable, and I spent however many years in graduate school, working finally on those types of skills. But I actually had a liberal arts tradition. I went to a Christian liberal arts college where they required me to study ethics, and they required me to take Bible classes and take worldview classes.
Yeah.
So there was a core there where they said, you're not really an educated person if all you do is learn a specific skill that will apply to a particular job. So my concern about culturally is that we're so for example, right now, STEM happy, that we're gonna miss the education of the holistic person, and that's absolutely what we're trying to do. So our purpose here, and I haven't even said our purpose yet, but our purpose here is to graduate culture-shaping young men and women whose minds and hearts have been trained to love that which is worth loving. That. Of course, we have high academic standards. We think our students, if they go through our program, are going to score well in tests and all that stuff. But I would view that as a happy byproduct of our primary goal. If we in fact succeed in training students to love that which is worth loving, do you think they're going to do their homework? Yes, because that's a lovable thing to do.
Of course.
Do you think they're going to love their neighbor? Yes, because that's a lovable thing to do. Do you think they're going to give their very best effort at anything to do? Absolutely, because they will have learned to love the lovable thing. Do you think they're going to shape the culture that they find themselves in? Yes. I think the academic component, while of course we as administrators and as a school, we have to be super mindful and thoughtful and plan in our curriculum sequence and that type of thing. But if we succeed in our primary goal, the rest will come along. So if we go back to your question, why did we move away from classical education?
Yes.
The truth is, of course, it's hard. It's not easy. In thinking back about the Industrial Revolution, so now we've got cars coming off the assembly line, good old Henry Ford, and we got World War II, and we need all these rivets, and we got to make these airplanes. And even now, you think about we need programmers. This is the wave of the future. Well, if you train only in programming, or if you start focusing on that too early, you're not going to have these other things to be able to gain this information. So, but someone who's been trained to know how to learn will be able to step into any scenario, hopefully, and garner the skills they need to succeed.
Yeah, gymnastic also is the big part of classical education. How you guys incorporate that in your school? PE?
Yeah, so gymnastic is another one of those classical words that we don't think about in the same way like music. So music, as we talked about, being sort of the opening the mind, the result of musing. Gymnastic, as we think about it, is Mary Lou Retton or whoever it is at the Olympics, and of course they're related. But gymnastic is simply the control of one's body. You can think about it that way. So in kindergarten, gymnastic education is to holding your pencil properly, and fine motor skills and development of gross and fine motor skills, which of course this doesn't make us unique from other schools. Other schools are developing that, but it is a core thing that we have to do. So, for example, I mentioned before that if students don't obey, we're not going to accomplish anything. But let's say you have obedient students who can't keep their arms from flopping all around. Now you're also not going to accomplish anything because their arms are
another
flopping.
problem.
Yeah, so it's one of those foundational things. So they obey, and then they learn control of their body, and then so the way that progresses, you mentioned physical education. So PE is a critical thing for us. It's a sort of a non-starter. Every student here has PE multiple times a week, and so the idea of our physical education program is to move from control of one's body to control of one's body with skill development. And then ultimately to team and cooperative type things. And then in the upper school also we're moving toward I wouldn't say we do like serious physical fitness, but our PE classes kind of alternate between game-oriented and fitness-oriented classes.
Okay.
So we're looking to train them well and taking care of their body. Body's a temple of the Holy Spirit after all, so we want them to take good care of themselves for all sorts of reasons. But we want them to learn to be engaged in games in ways that they're forced to control their body, have real control, and then be able to interact with teammates in proper ways.
Okay. Another big part of classical education is classical reading, classical books. How you guys go about, because there's a lot of classical books out there.
Yeah.
How do you go about picking what is good for our students?
Yeah, so there's a number of things that go into that decision. First, I think you make a good point. Is there are so many, even if you just take what would be objectively considered the classical canon, there's too much to read.
Yeah.
Right? So we couldn't possibly do them all. So we have a general philosophy of it's better to go deep on a few things than to shallowly understand everything or a lot.
Okay.
And there's a number of reasons for that, but if you're going to really digest and understand an idea or a work, that in and of itself is a certain type of a skill development that is part of the tools of learning. So we can't possibly understand every great work, but we can train the students on how to properly digest deeply any work. That's just our way of sort of giving ourselves freedom to not do everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So coming back to your question, how do we select? So part of it is we do eras of history. So we do history cycles here, a 4-year cycle. So this year we're in the ancient era. Next year we'll be in medieval.
Okay. The
year after that will be in early modern or Reformation, and then the 4th cycle is modern. And so this is really our whole school, except for maybe our seniors, juniors and seniors to some degree. We do American history and government economics for them pretty consistently. But through the rest of the school is cycling through those eras of history. So our desire is to have them reading original works that tie to those eras of history, whatever grade level they're at.
Okay.
So it will change year to year what exact works we're doing. But I'll give you an example of how we can select. So the omnibus class that I was referencing earlier has a textbook, but the textbook is not something that you sit down and read. The textbook is basically a collection of recommended resources or recommended original works to have students read based on an era of history or an idea or topic that you want to cover.
Okay.
And then what the textbook is composed of is kind of an introductory essay for that work, just a few pages, and then various key questions to ask, key takeaways, activities to explore the topic or explore the work in more detail that the teacher can use if he or she wants to go deeply into that. But just to come back to how do we choose? Well, that book is a good guide for a teacher to say, this year I'm going to do this one and this one and this one because these touch on our era of history and these touch on sort of the big questions that I want to ask this year, like what is justice and what is truth and those sort of the great questions, the great conversations that they might have on their objective list for that year. We had a family come to us a few years ago and said, hey, I really like the idea of this school and I love, the academic rigor and I want this for my child, but, we're not a Christian family. Could they just sit out the Bible class? My response was, well, it's an important class to us. And so the answer is no, like we wouldn't allow a student to be here and not go to the Bible class, but it kind of misses the point anyway.
Yeah.
Even if we would allow that, we're trying to integrate Bible and biblical worldview and big T truth thinking in every class. So the idea that you could just sit out one class and you wouldn't get the Bible component or the Christian component of this education is missing the point of what we're trying to accomplish. Yeah. And so in the end, I didn't say you can't come, but they just didn't end up applying because they got the idea that, this is, we're going to be going against the grain even if we were to come here. I say all that to say, I hope the Lord blesses the school greatly, but I also hope he protects us from really serving the families who really want what we're after.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing you mentioned last time. I think we had a conversation. You said something to the effect that we are not looking for parents who will run away from something. We want the parents who wants to be here.
Yeah, I don't know if I stole that from somebody or if I made it myself, but
I think you made up.
Yeah, I think it captures exactly what we're trying. We will take if a family's running away from something and they don't know what they want, they haven't found what they want. Yeah. We're happy to help fill in those gaps for them. Hey, maybe you want this. Yeah. Maybe you're running away from that because this is what you've always wanted and didn't know what existed. That absolutely has happened. But the best and easiest conversation is when a family comes and says, oh, I'm so thankful you're here. We've been doing this at home, or we moved from this other area. We literally have people moving to our area
for this school,
so that they can be a part of this school, which is a remarkable compliment to all of our staff who have worked so hard to grow this place. And it goes to show, I think, the dichotomy that exists enough that families are looking to uproot their lives and change where they live, where they're from, just so they have an opportunity to be part of a school that's not everywhere right now. Yeah. I think before long it will be more and more ubiquitous. But as of now, in Iowa, there's only a few. There's a few in Minnesota as well. But there's not just because if you live in Iowa, it's not a guarantee that you're going to have an opportunity.
Classical, like this. How many total in Iowa classical?
Well, so there's us. There's Morningstar Academy in Bettendorf. I think they were really the first, and they've been really helpful in our launching and development over the years. And then there's Adele Classical Academy in Adele. That's started by a good friend of mine who, and they're a university model, so they do. I should know, but it's either 2 days at school, 3 days at home, or 3 days at school, 2 days at home every week. So it's kind of like I wouldn't call it a homeschool co-op, but it's university. For those who know, it's university model style. Yeah. And then there's Two Rivers Classical, which is in Des Moines, and they're a bigger school, also classical. Also university model. So if you live in Des Moines and you're looking for an all-day classical school, it's not there. It's not there. Oh, wow. Classical Christian school, it doesn't exist. So those are. Us and Bettendorf Academy are the only two in Iowa that are all-day classical schools. Now, I want to give a quick caveat, which is that many Lutheran schools, often they're quite small and been around for a long time, but many Lutheran schools they may not call themselves a classical school, but many have that approach and have had for a long time that are doing something akin, we'll just at least call it akin to a classical Christian education. And so I'm not as up to speed on some of those little Lutheran schools that are around, but have been doing really faithful work for a long time. So I want to give them some kudos.
Now, you're a tech guy. What is your thought on ChatGPT and the education system?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. As soon as when I first saw ChatGPT, I'm trying to remember, it was sometime during last school year, and right away I signed up. And I think that day in our omnibus class, Mrs. Harding had assigned some essay for the students. It was, I can't remember the book they were reading. Her assignment was write a 2-page essay on the theme of justice in, let's just say they were reading The Hiding Place. I don't remember what they were reading. Write a 2-page essay on the theme of justice and how it was portrayed in the book The Hiding Place. So I signed up for ChatGPT and I write me a two-page essay on the theme of justice in the book, The Hiding Place. And 18 seconds later, well, probably 3 seconds later, I had a reasonably constructed, not great, but reasonably constructed, something that could be passed off for a high school student. And so I printed it off and I walked upstairs and I handed it to her and said, "We are in a new era."
Yeah.
I'm not sure how we're supposed to protect ourselves from this, except to have assessments like this assigned for in-class work.
Yeah. Oh, there's another side to that. Mm-hmm. Since you're already teaching these kids virtue, they might stay away from it.
They might. I think it's not necessarily, ChatGPT, just like any other technology, is a tool.
Yeah. So
tools are neither either or good. If they're just simply a tool, they can be used for either evil or good. So I think if so, first of all, you're right to point that out. And if we're training in virtue and succeeding, then they will use the tool for good, or they won't use the tool. As a school, we try to minimize work with screens, or at least for computers, and so phones and tablets are not even allowed at the school. I mean, students can bring them; they have to leave them in their locker or turn them to the teacher, so that they're not involved in school. As they get into upper school, so they're typing papers.
No kids bring cell phone in the classroom.
We have some upper school students who will bring phones, but they either have to take them straight to the locker or turn them into their teachers at the beginning of the day, and then they pick them up at the end of the day.
You guys are real in the Middle Ages.
If that's what it means to be in the Middle Ages, I'm happy to be there.
Now, it could be 1 or 2 or 3 parents listening out there, and this conversation on the classical education just sparked their mind, and they they want to learn more. How do they go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many resources. I mean, even if you're not in North Iowa and can't just walk in, just do some Googling and grab some books, grab the liberal arts tradition. There's classical schools really all over, not maybe in any given location there's not there, but all over the country. If you're in North Iowa, the best thing to do is to give a call or stop by. Just stop by, come anytime on a day when school is in session, and just come in, introduce yourself, say you'd be interested to see more about the school. And this isn't just like parents of potential students. I'm talking about anybody.
Yeah.
Anybody's interested in this. You can be an empty nester or not even have kids. I didn't have kids when we started the school. So the best thing to do is to come in on a school day and just walk the halls, sit in on a class or two for 10 minutes, and you will know right away if you want more of this. I don't mean to overhype it, but either you will say, yes, I want this, or you'll be like, oh, okay, I see what it is. It's maybe not for me. But most people who get to the point where they actually walk in the door, including me, I'm included here, not at our school, but at other schools. The reason we're here is I walked through Bettendorf, I guess it's Morningstar Academy in Bettendorf. I sat down. It was a high school level class. It was probably sophomores in high school. And the teacher was walking around this big round table, and he started the class by asking a question. And then the students thoughtfully, carefully, and joyfully discussed the topic for about 15 minutes before the teacher said anything else. And then, I don't remember the conversation exactly, but the conversation either was wrapping up or it was going in a direction the teacher didn't want. And so he just simply posed a question, reoriented the conversation, and then they bounced that around for another few minutes. The whole time he was bouncing the Super Ball. He was just walking around them, bouncing the Super Ball. And I just thought, I don't know how they did this, but I want more of this. And it doesn't take long before you see high school students doing that. And it's so countercultural, and it instantly makes you realize, oh, I didn't know this was possible. Like, sure, maybe in a bygone era, but this is happening. Like, I'm seeing this for myself right now. That's the best thing they can do.
And I think that's what Socratic method is all about.
He was doing exactly that.
Yeah, I mean, that's,
keep them on topic if you have to sometimes.
even though sometimes Socrates himself getting out of topic.
Yeah, that's right.
From 2014, 5 kids to 150 kids, what is the vision of the school right now? What do you see 10 years from now?
Oh boy, that's a good question. That's probably should be one of my. Well, I guess we are thinking about that as like a headmaster goal, but also from a board perspective. We just purchased a campus in Ventura, Iowa, which is just the other side of Clear Lake. We're going to remain Clear Lake Classical because it's the building is on Clear Lake. So
okay. Is somebody asking me about that?
Yeah.
That's still going to be okay.
Yeah, and we're going to stay here. So we're sitting in our Mars Hill campus building right now, and we're going to keep our lower school here, a big chunk of our lower school here. But what that does mean for the 10 years ahead is we are going to have probably all the space we're going to need to grow as big as this community can support over the next 10 years, I think. And I mean, this is a remarkable, in our view, movement of the Lord to provide this property to us. It was purchased in good faith with the local district who sold it to us. And the community there, by every measure, by every interaction we've had, is just so thankful that we purchased the building and the property so that it wouldn't get torn down. And the high school that all these people went to is still going to be there. It's been there since 1923. So basically 100 years right now. So it's 20 some acres, and it's just going to give us a place to grow into. So I think if you ask that question, though, what's the vision for the next 10 years of all of our board members, you might get some different answers. I think that's one thing that we're trying to figure out. Do we want to, for example, become a school of 500? Or do we want to settle in as a school of 250 and have a wait list if we continue to grow? But I think there's just so many opportunities. One of the things that's an emphasis for us as a staff this year in our professional development is incorporating what we would call the common arts. Yeah. You might think of that as like shop classes and gardening and culinary arts and trade. But in the classical tradition, we think of them as called the common arts. So we have all this property now. Like we could have a garden or a greenhouse, or we've got an area that used to be a shop class and a home ec class. So we're not going to have a shop class as part of our core curriculum. We're going to maintain a classical curriculum, but it allows us to consider the prospect of bringing in and integrating these common arts in a more fully fledged way. We try to do it even now, but we are limited by facilities and what we have. But I mean, we could literally have our CLC garden that we use to teach students how to do gardening skills, and then bring them in for a themed dinner that we have as part of a medieval unit, where we're eating the foods that they ate. There's just all sorts of options for us to, there's going to be a whole world open to us just from a facility standpoint. So I think we'll lean into that over the next 10 years. I think one of our challenges as a school, and I felt this pretty acutely, is how do we make this education, which is it's challenging. Mm-hmm. How do we make it available to, I don't want to say all, because I don't think that's possible. How do we make it available to most? Mm. And I truly think that all things being equal, most any child can do it. I think it comes back to this idea that we don't think enough of children, of what they can accomplish. It's easy for us to want to make it easier for our own, we always want to make it easier for our own children, especially nowadays. So I think, whereas you think about someone like C.S. Lewis, well, okay, he had a classical education, but he was, I don't know, I don't remember his biography perfectly, but he went to boarding school, he was on the more elite side, and he was inclined that way. And so he excels, and we remember him because he did all these amazing things stemming from this education. But what about just the other guy down the street who had no money? Could he have done it?
Oh, I see.
And I kind of think yes.
Oh my goodness.
And would it be best for him? And I kind of think yes. But we run into this. Obviously there are special needs and learning disabilities that maybe we can work through. And I know of some other, we'll say, colleagues in the classical world who are serving those types of students and doing it really well in a classical model. Obviously, it has its particular adjustments. My point is not so much to get into those weeds, but to say, really, for the first time in history, we are asking every student who comes our way, again, not just the cultural elite, to be trained in these things.
Okay. I love that.
And so I actually don't know the science on this, but this is going to seem like an aside, but I promise I have a point. I don't know the science on this, but I don't think there's anyone that's truly tone deaf. There's lots of people who can't sing and can't sing on key, but I don't think there's anyone that's truly tone deaf. Now, there probably is a scientific genetic mutation or something that makes a person tone deaf. But I think if you start early and train and do just some basic work to enable a student or a child to sing and sing on key, I think every human is capable of doing that to a first approximation. Mm. So I don't know how many people in our society can't sing, like what percent can't sing on pitch. Maybe it's 20%. And I think that can be totally eliminated, again, except for the 0.00001% maybe. And the reason is because at our school, all of our students can learn to sing on pitch. Now, we don't have a ton of them, but I've heard from other schools, we've been doing this for 20 years, and we have yet to have a student who can't learn to sing on key. And so in the same way, I think that the best possible education, which in my mind right now is a classical and Christian education in virtue, I think every child, again, to a first approximation, is capable of achieving that. But the truth is we don't know. Yeah. And the other aspect of this is it would be silly of us, foolish, for us to presume that or to have an expectation of our students like they're going to receive and be able to digest the level of education that like an Alexander Hamilton was able to digest. Yeah. He was 1 in a million or whatever, and not everyone was educated at that time. We remember him because he had the capability and the opportunity and all that. He's got a
even Lincoln.
Crazy. Lincoln, another example. Yeah. He was obviously inclined that way. He had basically educated himself. So I think it remains an open question to what degree is every student capable of pursuing this. I think the answer is they can.
Yeah.
But it does create some thoughtful consideration of what we should expect.
Yeah.
Of all of our students. Like we want to have the best thing you can do is have a bar for an individual bar for every student that's above what they can do, just barely above, so that they can strive and desire to get, and maybe they'll get there, and then you can raise the bar again for them. That's what we want to do. But in any populace, of course, that bar is going to be all over. Yeah. So how do you keep the bar raised for everyone, but not leave anyone in the dust?
So the question is, how do we make classical education accessible for all the kids?
Yes. Yeah. And so, again, I think it's an open question, which is starting to be answered, which is, in general, it is. Yeah. Again, as long as you're not asking too much, there's a point where you can ask too much of a typical student.
Yeah.
But a meaningful education that gives students the tools of learning in the classical Christian tradition, I think, is possible.
Yeah.
But again, we're only a few decades into making that attempt.
My mind is racing now. Can that also be incorporated in terms of after-school program? Let's say for the public school kids, and you create some type of after-school program for classical education.
Possibly. And I think, again, we do a lot, and so there may be some things that in a public school setting, sort of nuts and bolts that students will get. The easiest way to think about this is like algebra. While we think that our algebra class probably looks a little different, if a student passes a reasonable algebra class at the local public school down the road, they probably will understand algebra. And there's much more equivalence potentially between the two algebra classes than there would be between the two history classes or the two literature classes, both from an expectation standpoint and a worldview standpoint, an emphasis standpoint. So I think basically what I think you're asking is, could a education in another school be augmented with additional work of some type?
Yeah.
And certainly it could be augmented. I think one of the things we talk about, we just updated our tardy and absence policy. And one of the things that we highlighted is, in rolling that out, is presence is important.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to go to an extreme or to a principle, physical presence is so important. So it's super important to be physically present. This is why I think there's an image of God argument to make against online learning.
Yeah, I mean, even talking about presence, even the creation of man.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
it's just like that was not spoken words.
That's right.
It's like I want to be right here, create this thing personally.
Yeah, so there's something that cannot be replicated, and so for a lot of our discussion-oriented classes, if you were gone that day, you can make up the assignment potentially, but you cannot make up what you missed.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that our discussions or any one discussion is so profound that it can't be replicated. But it is to say that the interaction that happened within that class that will be referred to in the future with those peers and as you digest other things is lost. You won't be able to have that reference point.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think there are always things you can do to augment, but you cannot replicate.
Yeah. I love that idea, though. Try to have the classical education accessible to everybody.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, even in today's world, no matter how you look at it, it's a little bit elite education. Not everybody can get into
Yeah, that's right. That's a good
classical
point.
education. Imagine if you educate the whole society on the classical education, what type of country you're going to have.
Wouldn't that be great? I think accessibility, that's the right word. So as we think about what we have to charge for the school, first of all, in the state of Iowa now with school choice, it has become even more accessible. But even before school choice, it was a key point for us to have, that's the word we used. How do we make our school accessible to anyone who wants to be here? So those are two important things: accessible and want to be here. So if you want to be here, we will find a way. This is what we've told parents, and I think we have lived up to that through tuition assistance and raising money and whatever else. And so, you know, it's easy as a school that labels yourself with some fancy adjective like classical. It's easy for, I'm sure, people in the community think, oh, they're this elite school, or it's just for rich people or whatever. And the numbers would just say that's not the case. You know, more than half of our students are on some sort of tuition assistance support. I think we're an example, or we're a budding example of this form of education really being possible for any student. We haven't had the ability or the opportunity to delve into students with significant learning disabilities yet. Yeah. But we do have some students with learning disabilities who have found a way through, not significant not significant kinds, but things that that we make accommodations for. Yeah. That have been able to thrive. And so I think it really is accessible, but I'm just pointing it out as like an unanswered question.
Yeah. Let's stay here for a second. Let's say I have a classical education background. I went to classical education school, and I have the same passion. I'm like, man, I want everybody to be educated. I want all kids in my neighborhood. As a matter of fact, let's start there. I want all kids in my neighborhood to get a classical education experience. What can they do?
Yeah, I've got advice, but it's not going to be easy.
Oh, I'm not looking for easy advice. This is a higher learning thing, Cory.
My advice is start a school.
Well, that's harder than
I told you it wasn't going to be easy. But, you know, there's a lot of people that have started schools recently. Yeah. So it is doable. And there's no particular training required. I didn't have any training required. I always thought I was going to teach college. Okay, that's why I got a PhD. That's why I went to graduate school, because I knew if I was going to teach college, I needed to have a PhD or else I wouldn't get hired. Yeah. And so it was in this time I was telling the story about the start of school, I was offered a position at my alma mater to teach college, and that was our other option. Was go there or stay here. And so I was in the vein, like education was in the vein of what I was interested in. Yeah. But if you had asked me in 2012, if I was going to start a Christian school, I would have said, what are you talking about? No, I might teach at one at a college, but I'm not going to start a school. Yeah. So it comes up and bites you, I guess is what I'm saying. And it is difficult. It requires desire and passion, but it is possible. Other than that, you know, there are ways you can support what's going on. Of course, you could sponsor a child of your own or someone else to be able to financially be able to, I would say, get up and move to a place where it exists. If you want it that bad, people are doing that. If we had stumbled upon classical education, which presumably we would have by the time we had kids school age, I think my wife and I would have moved. We've joked there's a classical school in Florida at the place where her family has gone or holiday breaks. And so we've joked that, oh man, if we hadn't started this school, then we'd probably be living in Florida during the school year, having our kids go to that school and be up here in the summer in Clear Lake. Yeah.
Let's say that every kid in North Iowa get the classical education training, and they miss a portion of theology. Uh-huh. Are we still going to be in a better place?
Whew. I think possibly. I'm not interested in running that experiment. And here's what I mean by that. So we talk about clever devils. I am concerned, even now as our school, with parents who in general are Christians and are on board and have gone through our admissions process, and they want what we're offering. Yeah. They want this for their kids. One of my number one concerns is that we will train students to persuade and synthesize well, and they will persuade people away from the truth, right? Because we've trained them well in the skill. And so it would worry me to train everyone if the virtue component was not, if I was pretty sure that wasn't going to come through. And the way that so another school could take, well, I'll come back to that. A way for us to be careful that doesn't happen is to make sure that parents want what we're offering, because that's going to be the biggest influence. Yeah. Now here's what's happening though. Yeah. This classical word, at first it was like, what are they doing? You know, whatever, they think they're so great or whatever. And then before long, these students graduate from these classical schools with these great academics, these great ACT and SAT scores. And so when there's school choice legislation going on and like charter schools, they throw in the name classical, and now they can't do the God part because it's technically a public school, but it's a charter school, so they're going to be classical style. So now they're like, hey, we're a classical school. We're training in this historical stuff. We're just taking the God part out. And a lot of times those charter schools are being started by Christians who say, hey, we can't do the overt God thing, but we're going to have a classical charter school funded by the state. And so my point is, people are realizing, hey, if you're a classical school, that's going to be looked on as like this highly academic, like really strong academic school. And so they're grabbing that word and saying that's who we are. And maybe they're doing it well, maybe they're not, but they're trying to do it without the God component. And I just don't think it flies in the same way. Yeah. Well, I know it doesn't fly in the same way. The other example of that, so there's the charter schools kind of trying to co-opt the name and claim, for the reputation that they're the classical school. So then the other aspect of that is college entrance. So we require our students to take something called the classical learning test. So this is a new college entrance exam. It's akin to the ACT and the SAT, but the SAT and ACT score or organizations are beholden to the universities, right? So they have changed the nature of their test to adapt to whatever Common Core, whatever things going on in the public school, so that those students can do well, and also it's more testing. This is and I'm not an expert here, but I've done enough reading to know that what's happening is those tests are more and more not testing for aptitude, but testing for skill or a particular ability. Oh. So whereas we're trying to give the students the tools, other schools are trying to give the students skills. We've talked about this already. So the classical learning test came along and said, hey, we've got all these classical schools popping up, and they're not really being tested in the way that they're learning. They're really learning more like a classic aptitude test, like the SAT used to be, but has moved away from. And so we're going to start this other test so that our classical students can take a test along the lines of the type of thing that they've been learning. And so what has happened, and this is in general, but there's data on this, is that students in classical schools, graduates, take the ACT or SAT and do well, compared to other schools better. They do better on those tests already. But then they
15% higher.
Yeah, but then they take the classical learning test, which is more akin to what they're learning, and we have this sort of separate objective metric that can also distinguish classical students as well. And guess what the colleges have done?
They changed that.
They have realized that all of these good schools and all these good students are taking the classical learning test, and they've started accepting the CLT as a college entrance exam. So now there's like hundreds and hundreds of schools who are accepting this test because schools aren't stupid. Admissions offices aren't dumb. Yeah. They're like, hey, those are good students. We need to take that test.
Yep. Are there a path for homeschooling to do a classical? Okay.
Yeah. So there's a couple of, I forget what they call them, groups of classical conversations in our area that do, roughly maybe exactly classical model type of things in the homeschool. And most of them work by getting together for, I don't know exactly how it works, one day a week or one morning a week, and they kind of have a co-op, and they do a couple class type things together, and then they do homeschool the rest of the week in the classical model generally. Oh, okay. And of course, it's a different experience for every student because the parents are the key teachers there. So it can be done really well and really poorly, I'm sure, but there's opportunities for that around here for sure.
Man, anything you want to add? Anything we didn't talk about?
Oh, there's 1,000 things we didn't talk about. Just that it's a joy to be part of the movement to the extent that we are here. I'm thankful that the Lord has seen fit to bless us in the various ways that He has up till now. I've got a little document I keep of the ways that the Lord has blessed our school, things that He's done that can't reasonably be explained by the work of men and women. So I'm just really thankful and blessed to be able to be part of it.
Cory, thank you very much, man.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
This was fun.